kind of hop on, talk about Pitchai, talk about how we kind of go about using that process for biomechanics at our facility at BDG. So located up in Toronto, train athletes all from kind of youth ages up to some professional guys. We've had kind of a lot of success integrating the biomechanics into our process. So the way that, I kind of view even coaching and biomechanics in general is that there's kind of four stages that I would kind of bucket out as kind of the way that we go about things. Obviously, the first component is going to be running through an assessment with guys, and that's where we're going to do a lot of things from both a movement off the mound perspective and movement on the mound. So guys are coming in, they're doing range of motion screenings on the table, strength assessments. Then we get into the pitching and look at their biomechanics with Pitchai. After that assessment, we then move into what we call like a goal setting with athletes. So that's where we're going to recap all our findings with assessment and then start to set some KPIs, things that are objective in nature that we're pulling from Pitchai, in which throughout their training, we can kind of tangibly track over time to make sure that we're actually improving in the direction that we want to go. After that, guys actually start their training and they move into an onboarding. The big thing here for us is doing what we call a drill fitting, which I can kind of expand on a little bit more in depth in a little bit. But essentially that is us kind of using Pitchai to actually analyze some of the constraint drills that we have athletes do to see what is most effective for them. And then obviously kind of the last process with coaching is then adapting whatever plan that we've set from a programming perspective to fit the individual athlete's needs as they're kind of going through their training process and things arise that, we haven't kind of planned for. So in our assessment, the biggest kind of component that we're trying to do is objectify our coach's eye. So all biomechanics and Pitchai is really allowing us to do is take things that we've kind of long thought about as coaches, something like a late arm or a soft front leg, and now apply some sort of specific definition towards that to kind of remove any biases that we have as a coach and allow, consistency when we're assessing that. So in the past, when we assessed, mechanics purely from a qualitative standpoint, you'd have a lot of kind of different perspectives or different viewpoints between coaches, either in our facility or kind of online when you would watch guys' mechanics. Everybody would have a kind of difference of opinions there. With biomechanics, you're able to kind of, cut through some of those perceptions and actually get right down to, sort of what matters. So, the topic that kind of comes up a lot, when people are asking about our assessment process is how do we know when something is actually good or not? And the process that I would kind of take from that is starting with looking at comparing to research. So guys from like Glenn Fleissig and ASMI, some of the Driveline blog posts would give you a great kind of foundational understanding of where biomechanics is coming from or what the like average pitcher is doing. The one caveat to that is that, there is a lot of difference between motion capture technologies. For example, ASMI, I think in their studies, they're going to pick up peak shoulder internal rotation velocity at like mid 7,000s, right? Pretty high relative to Pitchai. If you guys have used that a lot, I think for us, the highest that we've ever seen a guy with their shoulder is like low to mid 5,000s. So there's just a little bit of differences between there when you are looking at research, but it still does give you a great kind of starting point. From there, the next kind of step to building out what's good is trying to actually collect like internal data. So we've been fortunate now to actually have, probably over 130 athletes in the last year that we've collected data on. And we have that little bit of a database that we've kind of started to build, and we can compare athletes to that. The other big thing here then too is comparing apples to apples. So comparing athletes, at their first assessment to a reassessment in some sort of specific time, right? Whether that's a month, a week, or whatnot. So at this point, we've used Pitchai, anytime a guy is stepping foot on the mound at somewhat of a high intensity, we're collecting at least several pitches from it so that we can actually analyze it over time. Not necessarily to share any of the information with the athlete, but just to make sure that we're actually, like I said, with those KPIs kind of trending in the right direction. When we kind of talk about, interpreting that data or communicating it to the athlete, we really want to try to kind of cut through some of the kind of meat and potatoes of it and talk about a big, domino effect that the delivery has. So oftentimes, biomechanics are going to start with this kind of ripple effect where something early in the motion is going to cause systematic change throughout the entire sequence of events. So it's often, it's often complicated the athlete to understand all the different intricacies within the motion, but we're trying to pick out the couple of big things that he really needs to work on that are going to have the most bang for his buck. The other thing that I really like, and it's in the slide deck if you guys are looking at it, but there's this quote that talks about, communication is 20%, what you know, and 80% how you feel about what you know. I really love that idea because I think, a lot of times guys think that they need to have, a master's level of education or a PhD level of education with biomechanics. And I think the bigger kind of importance is that athletes are looking to us to have some sort of confidence with what we're seeing and being able to communicate that back to them. And it doesn't require us to know every single little intricate detail, but equipped with the data, we can have a really confident understanding of something in their delivery that we can actually target and improve with. Talking a little bit about that onboarding. So I kind of mentioned that early. We're really trying to get after the idea of like, how do we actually change mechanics? Once we've established that we want to, either decrease trunk angle at foot plant or something like that in one of our KPIs, how do we actually go about kind of doing that? And the biggest thing, obviously as coaches, we've always kind of used drills. And we have an idea of what they do, but not necessarily a concrete understanding of how that actually works for the individual athlete. So what we've kind of stumbled upon is now doing in our onboarding what we call a drill fitting, which is essentially a week or two of kind of throwing a bunch of different drills at the athlete, collecting data on Pitchai, and starting to understand which drill works best for them. So, one of the photos that I have up on the slides shows kind of one of our data collections from a group of like a dozen athletes doing a couple of drills. And what you're going to see there is that there's massive variance athlete to athlete between how effective drills are, whether that's, just simply from like a cueing standpoint or a comfortability with the drill. Any one of those things is going to drastically, impact how well an athlete can do the drill or how effective that is for them. So that's that's one of the main parts with Pitchai that I'm really excited about, and that we utilize so much is it doesn't have to be an actual pitch that you're capturing. As long as it's something that resembles a pitch that has a little bit of a leg lift, you're able to actually get some quantifiable information off of that, and then that can guide your kind of coaching process. And then, the last part of kind of using the technology is obviously then adapting it, because any plan that we kind of create is not going to be perfect. So throughout the training process, there's always going to be things that come up, whether it's an athlete having time off or an injury, or they get kind of burnt out from training. We have to kind of adapt whatever we're doing, whether that's changing up the drills that we've done or having just regular athlete check-ins to make sure that we're kind of on that path with those KPIs that we've talked about. And then it's also important that we're always getting their feedback throughout that training process, because as much as we might have this, perfect kind of plan or this idealized, viewpoint of how we want to change their mechanics, it's important that we're actually communicating with the athlete to ensure that whatever that change is, that they've kind of bought into that and they understand the direction that we're trying to go. So, that's really all I got in terms of, prepared stuff, but happy to dive into questions or touch on stuff in a little bit more detail that I might have glanced over.
Lennon, are there any trends you see with like certain drills affecting the way certain guys that move similar? So like a guy that's super rotational, you probably don't want to put him in like a janitor type drill because you're just making him more rotational, trying to get that guy more linear, and then the same like opposite, a guy that's more linear, trying to give him more like a janitor or something like that. Or is it really individualized as you've done like the drill sets?
Yeah, there's definitely some generalized trends that you'll find. I think one of the things that we found, like with the drop step in particular, is that because of the constraint that you're setting up completely away from the target with your chest, you are going to delay trunk rotation. The effectiveness of that, though, is going to be really related to the athlete. So some athletes might see very marginal gain, and then other athletes might see, drastic a change. And that's why, we put out this information on the drop step and janitor, because two very similar drills, two very similar things that we're trying to accomplish with them, trying to delay, that trunk to pelvis kind of separation, and like working on hip to shoulder a little bit, right? And so both of those drills can kind of do what you're asking the athlete to do. It's which drill actually would work best for the athlete is kind of the direction that we're going with it. And same thing you could have with like a step back or a walking wind up, something that where, you're maybe trying to work on the back leg or increase momentum down the mound. Again, those are probably going to work almost like on par with one another from across a whole generalized viewpoint with athletes, is then, narrowing that focus or that scope for the particular athlete that you're working with. Findings from a range of motion into the drills, that doesn't have a lot of applicability, honestly, for us, because what we're trying to do is kind of move athletes towards the movement strategies that we're looking for. So an athlete might come to us with like limited rear hip internal rotation. That doesn't mean that we're going to shy away from doing drills that actually accentuate that. It's more going to be about trying to target mobility drills or exercises in the weight room that would help athletes gain accessibility through that range. I think, that's one of the things that people can kind of look at is saying that guys have, limited range of motion. And it means that, we never want to go into that range, which is actually kind of counter to the whole idea is that we're actually trying to improve that range of motion. So we have to kind of utilize that in drills. So it's not a big consideration that we have. The biggest thing I would say with that is we're trying to pair mobility work with whatever the movement flaws that we find on the mound. So guys that have limited, rear hip range of motion, whether that be internal rotation or abduction, those are things that they're going to kind of go through some correctives before they throw, and then pair drills that are going to overemphasize that stuff in the throwing motion, if that makes sense.
Yeah, thanks for that.
I think that movement screen is so crucial too, especially when we talk about kids in Australia. Like, there is no screening process for the most part in most places in the country. And you're trying to give a kid a drill and he can't physically do it. And you're banging your head against the wall and the kid's just going to get frustrated, and you're not realizing why he can't get into those positions if we're not actively attacking that too. Like, sure. I think that happens a lot. We give a guy a drill and we're like, hey, this isn't working. The kid gets worse. And then we give him another drill. And it's just this downward spiral of throwing drills at the guy to hope that it sticks. And that's where I like what they're doing with this drill fitting, because you're actually testing it on the kid to see what is being effective for that kid, which makes a ton of sense to me.
Honestly, we probably don't have as much issue with that as you guys would have. Obviously bigger organization for you guys, a lot more people kind of involved. With us, pretty small team, so we're all somewhat on the same page. The one thing that I would say is like building off of what Pitchai does, having some sort of reporting system that goes beyond just the biomechanical outline probably would help a lot with that disseminating information. That's even something that we do for our athletes as well. And I think there might be an example of that in the slideshow, but essentially we try to blend qualitative mechanics with quantitative, and then put that into kind of like a mechanical grading sheet, which kind of ranks guys from good, acceptable, poor, or in some cases all the way up to elite. That's a way for us to kind of visualize and like outline to the athlete which areas throughout their mechanics are they actually struggling with. I just think that would be something that if I were to deal with a lot more coaches on like a broader scale, that would be something that you could actually give to multiple people so that they understand what you're trying to improve. Because not everybody, even in our company, not everybody has the same familiarity with biomechanics, but they can look at that kind of outline that I've shared and understand immediately, okay, like his pelvis doesn't really rotate well, and that's what we're focusing on. They wouldn't necessarily be able to actually evaluate that themselves, but having me evaluate that for them allows us to kind of all be on the same page.
Yeah, bonus.
Lennon, can you talk a little bit about the role of like strength and conditioning plays for you guys? Like using this analysis to kind of maybe identify something that guy needs to do in the weight room and how that kind of transfers.
Yeah, I mean, with us, and I'm sure, you guys in Australia are the same way. So many guys here are just like physically immature. We'll get a lot of high school guys that have just like either, never really touched a barbell or never just eaten food. So like they need to gain a lot of size, a lot of mass. And that's just going to that's just going to help their mechanics, right? A lot of times we'll see guys that they come in, we'll screen their mechanics, and everything for the most part checks out. But the thing that we'll see is like they might be moving fast, but they're also moving 120, 130 pounds fast. That's an entirely different can of worms than being 200 pounds and being able to rotate your shoulder 5,000 degrees, right? Kind of easy for you to be 120 pounds and rotate that shoulder fast. So for us, yeah, it's a massive component. I would say the biggest things that, we see like trickle over into the weight room with is something like hip to shoulder separation or maximum external rotation. So much just because like those things are very related to athletes' range of motion, their ability to get in that position either passively or actively. So a lot of the way that we kind of program stuff in the weight room is also integrating mobility into it. So it's not just guys kind of hitting squats for the entire session, right? It's like early in the off season, it would be, doing clusters of squats paired with, 90-90 transfers or hip cars or stuff that is going to actually, target some of that range of motion findings that we'd have. So, strength always helps, with biomechanics. The mobility side is probably a little bit more important, I think, directly related to how they're moving on the mount, more so than strength. Strength is just kind of building that engine, but mobility is somewhat like the train tracks that is going to actually, follow, if that makes sense.
Yeah,
What
I think
role
what
does
we,
speed? Oh, sorry.
go ahead.
I was just going to say, just building on that, what role does speed play within that?
I can't really talk too much about that. I don't know. I mean, I would say speed overall is really related to strength as well. The more that you can squat, typically we're going to see 10-yard dash sprint times go down, things like that. So there is, different categories of strength, and that's something that, we built into our assessment as well. Is, you have reactive strength, you have absolute strength, relative strength, speed strength, all these different categories, right? With young athletes, we're trying to chase that absolute strength side, like how much pure raw weight they can lift. We're trying to chase that, for a long time until they meet criteria that, they've kind of put themselves into a position where they can actually adequately, produce force, and then trying to train them to actually, how do you produce that force quickly? So, more elite guys, higher up professionals are probably going to be good at the absolute strength, and then need to spend a lot more time on focusing on how to move things fast. And that's going to help them, obviously with their pitching as well. It's not, a slow motion by any means. So integrating some type of speed strength work in the weight room, especially later in the off season as they approach their season, is where our kind of periodization ends up going.
Yeah, and I think that's key for the Australian kids because like they don't lift in high school. So a lot of our guys have never lifted a weight before, or they're just starting to lift weights. So we have so much upside there with just gaining absolute strength that the issue I see is like a lot of the pitching coaches and a lot of like the club coaches and stuff want to give these guys a whole bunch of drills, but physically they can't really do anything. And we would have better results just being more patient. Maybe we use Pro Play to kind of guide where we're going with some of our strength stuff and some of the drill work that we do, but we don't need to throw a whole bunch at these guys when physically like they're going to develop over the next couple of years. And we got to have some patience there too.
Yeah.
Lennon,
Yeah.
for you, just like we produce like a whole bunch of 80-mile-per-hour arms that throw a ton of strikes because they don't move well. They've always been told to throw strikes. And like, that's what we're trying to get away from. And part of that is like just letting them get in the weight room and figure it out. And giving them some freedom to be athletic and explore movements. And we don't have to like drill down on these real specific movements yet because we just want to guide them to move better in general while they're going through the stage from like 15 to 18 and just get them in the weight room. We've always like Australia is literally mirroring the United States like 10 years ago. We're scared to lift weights because we don't want to get too big. We throw strikes because we got to pitch in games and everybody throws 80 miles an hour. And then occasionally we'll have a guy pop like a Hendricks or something. And that's like in spite of what we're doing, because he was a freak athlete. But if we can let guys be more athletic, get them in the weight room, guide them through their throwing programs and their drill sets, like we're going to have more athletic guys that actually have way more upside. I feel like when our guys get to 17, they're like a like finished product. And then they kind of get older, they throw a little bit harder, but not really much harder. And they play like men's league for the rest of their life throwing strikes, because that's the way they're always taught to do it. So I think we're trying to get really specific with these drills, but we also need to let it play out from a physical standpoint too, and decide when we're going to intervene and why, instead of just throwing random drills at these guys.
Yeah, 100%, man. I mean, I totally appreciate that. I think we're in a very similar boat in Canada. A lot of guys, obviously, you know, we get some elite hockey players and those guys have some physicality to them. But if you're not playing hockey at a young age, like you're probably not exposed to lifting weights, you're not exposed to, you know, training at a high level. So the other thing too that you mentioned there is like, and I think it's a good point, is like using, you know, we do this too with our young guys. Like they love to see the Pitchai stuff because they love to work on mechanics. So it's almost kind of for us, like it's kind of like this this carrot on a stick in a way, like using the biomechanics to kind of show them like, hey, like, you know, these are the things that you're improving, but like framing it in the same, you know, in the light of like, wow, these do matter. You gaining 50 pounds in the next 2.5, 3 years is going to be, you know, a bigger influence to your pitching career, to your baseball career than us like improving your lead leg block and stuff. So we try to kind of use it to entice them and have them enjoy the training process. But yeah, ultimately for a lot of these young guys, like the weight room is like the big separator, you know, at a young age.
I say I like that mindset, because we are like Australia's, it's always mechanics, changes delivery. And the guys just get so messed up in their head because they're told 15 different things. Like we need to allow them to be athletes and let it play out. Even if they don't throw strikes when they're 16, like that's okay. If he's throwing 93, 94, he's going to get a shot out of Australia anyway, regardless of whether he throws strikes or not. So I think we're on a call talking about pro play, which measures your delivery, but we want to talk less about deliveries if possible. But I like that, using it as a carrot to kind of show guys like, hey, you're moving in the right direction. This is good. We can kind of push this one way. And our focus being more in the weight room than on the field. Australia, we also play like 1 or 2 games a week, and there's not a lot of training in between there. It's like try to make maintenance during the week to try and pitch during your game on the weekend. And I think we need to change that mindset too, to like an everyday training kind of deal.
Just continue on from that little bit. There's a lot of external noise, or that the 16 and 17, and probably a little bit younger than that, go through over here, and trying to cut through those influences. And that can be a parent, that can be MLB TV, it can be stuff on YouTube, and cherry picking various different components out of a multitude of different people on the internet. Do you have the same issues there? And if so, how do you work through those to have people sort of work through what you're doing there at BDG?
Definitely a challenge. The big thing, you know, Pitchai helps a lot with that, because you're able to, like I talked about, you know, in that kind of goal setting, like you're setting objective, tangible things, you know, for an athlete, like you can clearly show them if their hips are too close at landing. You can talk a little bit about how that would influence, you know, their mechanics later down the stream. And then you set a goal of like, okay, we want to see pelvis rotation go from 35 degrees to 45 degrees. So that helps a lot in terms of like communicating or kind of like working with people in that. I think the biggest thing is just having the athlete's best interests at heart and showing them good resources that they can follow. So whether it's our resources, whether it's stuff that, you know, we've put out, or it's like telling them what accounts, you know, on social media that we do like, you know, that we do kind of subscribe to and think they have good content and stuff. One of the things that helps too is I know like a lot of our guys, for better or worse, love Trevor Bauer, watch his vlogs all the time and stuff like that. And, you know, me being kind of a younger coach, like I'm pretty in tune with all that stuff. So everything that our athletes are watching, like I'm probably watching as well. So it helps there because we can have conversations. If they come up to me, you know, having seen something on Trevor Bauer's vlog, it's like, Yeah, I saw that same thing, and like we can talk a little bit about like, what that means, why we might be doing something different than he is, and kind of sharing my perspective with them.
It happens everywhere. We have first round draft picks come and tell us they saw a drill on Twitter that they start doing it the next day. So like it's not going away. If anything, it's getting worse because there's going to be more and more videos on Twitter, and there's going to be more information, and every guy has their own personal coach now, and they'll say, hey, my trainer at home saw my video from this game last week and I should be doing this, this, and this. And it's like, no, we have a plan in place. This is why we're doing it. We use Pro Play too. Like, no, we're not going to do what your trainer said at home because this is why. Like, we have a plan, it's working, whatever. And sometimes maybe it is good information. Oh, they did see something that we didn't see, and we're like, okay, that kind of makes sense. Let's do it. But that's the coaching part, where you got to tell these kids, hey, we're not doing this, and this is why. We are going to do this, and this is why. And it's hard because these kids want to jump at every single little thing, and they want to see success really quickly. And success doesn't work like that. It's going to take time, and you're going to have bad weeks. You're going to have bad games. Your velo is going to drop before it goes up. Like, that's the coaching part. It'd be easy to just say, hey, use Pro Play, do this drill, and you're going to get better. But it doesn't always work that way.
Sort of down.
Yeah, that's a great question. I mean, I think those are the decisions that you end up making a lot is, especially like athletes are going to come to us and they're going to have a million problems, like we're really fortunate sometimes when we work with elite athletes where they only have one issue, and then that becomes easy for us to know exactly what to work on. Right. We have one of our professional guys where like the only thing that he needs to work on is like his lead leg, right? Everything else is just flawless. With these high school guys, it's like, you're looking at it and like, you could just kind of close your eyes and throw a dart and you're like, yep, that's a problem. So definitely understand that is a big thing. I would say, particularly with those three things. So hip shoulder, or like just pelvis trunk sequencing, MER, stride length. MER is probably going to be the thing that's most related to the athlete's mobility or strength. So that would be something that probably wouldn't even touch at all. Anytime that we see a guy that has low MER in the throwing delivery, 9 times out of 10, he's going to be a guy that has something in his range of motion screen that comes up inhibiting him, whether it's something that he has like pain or past like injury history that is inhibiting him from going into MER. So anytime that we see a guy like below even like honestly 170 in a delivery, I would definitely recommend getting him looked at by like a range of motion screen to understand more about just his shoulder, more about his injury history, et cetera. Stride length is an interesting one because we have a couple of guys here that like stride 102%, believe it or not, like far beyond their body height. That is one that I would say we're definitely not going to tackle in like the straightforward sense. What you'd see with guys that overstride or understride is that it's going to be potentially inhibiting some other part of the delivery. So the hip shoulder or sorry, the trunk pelvis sequence is probably related to him overstriding. So I would more focus on cueing the athlete or doing drills that would try to get his hips or torso, that separation between the two. And then if his stride length changes as a result of that, that's fine, right? Because, as long as we're in that kind of range of our stride, like somewhere between 80 to 90, 95%, it's really a non-issue. At that point, it's just like the athlete's, unique kind of properties that's allowing it. So yeah, I mean, those are the decisions, and those are the things that kind of keep me up at night a lot, because there's a lot of stuff that you can kind of consider when you're looking at, various movement flaws. But I think the biggest thing that I always think about is like that domino effect of like, what is the one thing there in whatever the problems that you see in Pitchai or its biomechanics, like what is the one problem that is going to create the most kind of effect throughout his entire pitching motion? And that's the thing that we're going to target. Yeah. So the first part of that question, you probably can never have too much MER. We have a lot of our elite guys that'll be, above 200 degrees. The important thing to note there too, and I don't know if Mike talked to you guys about this, is that angle is also very relative to the athlete's trunk position. So the more forwardly flexed you are, the higher degree of MER you're going to have, because it's not independent of the torso. The two things are actually working together, if that makes sense. So if an athlete is like super upright at the time of MER, he's probably going to have only like 180 degrees. Whereas if he's more forwardly flexed towards home plate, he's going to push 190, 200, as long as his shoulder has that complete layback. So yeah, I mean, we're never kind of red flagging guys if they have too much MER. The only thing that we would red flag is if they're getting into MER either late or early. So when they land at foot plant, are they a guy? And we'll see this a lot with like really young high school guys that are kind of like Gumby. They have very little motor control. They'll be back to like 140 degrees of MER by the time their foot plants, right? And we're looking at that as like, that's a lot of like chronic stress that you're putting on your shoulder and your elbow as you're starting to rotate. So that would be a thing that we would flag with it. The other part of that, how do we transition guys from different sports? I think like the better movers are always going to be, they're always going to have the highest ceiling. Guys in another sport, whether it's cricket or, for us, a lot of hockey players up here, right? Guys have, just great feel for their body. So they might not be super in tune with baseball or the baseball specific movement patterns, but they can pick it up quite quickly. I would say they're like, following like your typical constraints led approach and like heavily constraining those guys initially to kind of guardrail some of those degrees of freedom is probably what's necessary for them, because you can't just like throw them on the mound and assume that they're gonna self-organize and kind of figure it out. Like you have to go piece by piece and start to add little things in over time with them. But something that we don't probably have as much experience as you guys would with that type of thing.
Lennon, how often are you reassessing with pro play? So say you assess, you give the guy a drill set. How often do you reassess?
Yeah. So our entire assessment is like a really big process. So it's like a two to 3 day thing where we're doing strength testing, we're having them on the table. That whole assessment, we're probably looking at like a 6-month reassessment for. Now, when we're talking about like pitching and the biomechanics, like we're somewhat reassessing like every week, right? Every time that the guy is doing a high intensity throwing, we're collecting video of that. So whether it's like just high intensity drills on flat ground or it's high intensity drills off the mound, like we're going to snap a couple of videos of that, just like for a research purpose, almost more so than anything, so that we're making sure that, again, we're trending in the right direction, trying to get a better idea of like how he's moving at max speeds related to like lower efforts. So trying to do it as often as we possibly can. But, I would say like big change takes a while. So like 4 to kind of 6 months, 3 to 6 months is probably the timeline that I'm looking at to really expect like a massive change in his mechanics and his overall, like physiology. So, yeah.
Sequence and therefore the amount of speed that you can pitch at.
Yeah, really important. I mean, there's kind of, I would say like 4 to 5 things that like we're valuing the highest. So highest being like shoulder internal rotation velocity. I think second highest we have trunk rotation velocity. Third is like MER. Fourth is I think like even scap load potentially, and then like 5th or 6th is lead knee. So one of the things that we do is try to there's a lot of stuff that Pitchai spits out using some of our research. I mean, fortunate to work with guys that are studying with their masters biomechanics using Pitchai. So they have somewhat access to stuff that, I wouldn't be fortunate, just myself to have. So we've kind of identified those, 4 to 5 things as being probably the most important from a biomechanical standpoint. The biggest thing to understand though is like, all those things are going to be impacted by stuff earlier, right? So your shoulder internal rotation velocity is going to be drastically influenced by like where your arm is at foot plant. So as much as we're valuing the speed at which your arm can do this really fast, like if your elbow starts like down here at foot plant, you have to climb up, like that's going to be something that, we're probably going to emphasize because we know it's going to have some inhibiting factors later in the delivery. So lead knee, definitely important. Extension velocity, probably not as important. As one of the things that we look at a lot is like how much range of motion on that front knee do they move through? So we're looking at like just that angle graph, right? Going from foot plant to ball release. Has he moved through, 20, 30 degrees of range of motion with that? If that knee is actually like getting that extension, that's really great. Even if it's a slow velocity and he's like not really snapping into that front leg as much, not super concerned with that as long as that extension is actually occurring. Obviously ideal world, both are happening. The guy slams into that front leg really well. Extension velocity is high and that range of motion is high, but yeah, the angle matters probably, I would say slightly more than the actual velocity that's occurring.
Great, thanks, Len.
I think the other thing we need to consider too, especially for like more elite or older athletes, is like looking at what they do well and their pitch characteristics, because we don't want to take away that uniqueness either. Like we have a guy, Bailey Folter, real soft front knee, but like that's kind of what makes him unique too. And his fastball plays, he's not injured. There's no reason for us to kind of intervene there unless we're trying to do something. So
For sure.
I think in Australia, we take away a lot of things at an early age because we're not willing to let these guys kind of explore what they do well, or we don't know what they do well and what they don't do well from a pitch characteristic standpoint. Like a guy that has a ton of ride, maybe he's like this, and we try and take that away from him because it looks weird. Then all of a sudden he loses that fastball ride, and now he's not very good anymore. So that's just something to consider when we look at these guys. Like, are we taking away a characteristic that they do well? And at times we have to. If it is they can't throw hard enough, they're always hurt, that may be a time where we need to intervene on that too. But just simply looking at the metrics and trying to chase a perfect metric, I don't think is perfect, because there are other things that make guys unique too.
Yeah, great point. Yeah, I mean, that's something that we consider a lot too, right? Is those pitch characteristics. And then also, like it goes back to that point that we talked about of young athletes, like, them adding 50 pounds, they're going to be a fundamentally different human being than the guy that we're looking at right now. So as much as you can chase perfect movement, in a guy who is 13 at, 100 pounds soaking wet, like he's going inevitably to be a different person, older. So letting those guys be free and kind of just be athletic and using Pitchai there just to like see if things are trending in the right direction. Things with age that we'd expect to increase is like, is MER staying constant as they get older? Are they still rotating fast? Like, is their stride length changing drastically? Like little things like that that we kind of look at, from like a very long-term perspective, would be kind of important. Happy to answer any more questions that you guys have, either via email. I think you guys have my email now, or reach out to me on Twitter, DM, whatever. But yeah, really, excited to see what you guys end up doing in Australia. I can definitely appreciate having baseball kind of feel like a second class sport out there. Up in Canada, like we're fighting the same battles, man. So a lot of guys want to play hockey, not a lot of guys want to play baseball. So whatever we can kind of do to help you guys fight the good fight, I'm more than happy and down to do that.